My biggest question is, after reading your blog, other than the fact that it is a precept of the church, why fast from food? What are the benefits?
I think the core benefit is not forgetting God, as some people have written, that we are clearing the space, making emptiness for God to come in. And that happens on a number of levels. Empty stomach, but empty imagination. I'm reading more of John of the Cross these days, and he went through a dark night, not of his own choosing, but he recognized during his imprisonment, his 9-month incarceration by his brother Carmelites, that he needed to enter the darkness and the emptiness to find the fullness of God. So I think that's true for all of us to a degree, that we need to open a space for God in our bodies and in our minds, our intellects, our imaginations, our souls. That's what fasting can help with.
Okay. I do kind of wonder about if there's a difference between modern man or if it's just a personal problem, because you said that fasting helps silence the body's clamoring for attention. I know for me, it seems like no, when I'm fasting, that's the body is demanding attention.
Well, there's that hump to get over, but once you get into the zone, your body physically, I think, begins to pull us on its own resources better. And then there's a sweet spot there, I think, between um, constantly feeding and titillating our bodies with attention first versus denying necessary sustenance. But between those two extremes, there's a there's a leanness zone. I think that's what fasting, in my experience, is able to reach. So you're not thinking about food, but it takes a few days. I think also fasting from sounds and sights, you get used to it the first couple of days. Have you ever tried to fast from sugar? I mean, you get a headache at first and you go into psychological trauma. But after a few days, you start functioning better because we all eat too much sugar, I think. There was, I read a book, City of Joy, uh, by, I forget the author, Dominique Lapierre, I think. But he went to Calcutta, the City of Joy, and he ate like everybody else did, which is one meal a day at that time in India, and no processed sugar. And he went through terrible headaches, and it took maybe a week or two before I think he was throwing up and everything. It was very hard for him to adjust to that kind of a diet. But then when he got into it, it was so much healthier. So I think the point is, in every age, given supply systems, given access to food, we will eat too much. And so the fasting is a way of cutting back on the food there, but also fasting from other things opens us to the presence of God in a way that nothing else can. That is the essential reason for fasting, in my opinion, in my experience. So we
Okay.
don't forget God.
Well, then I guess that's another question I have for, um, or even you referenced the book Silence, which I haven't read, but I looked it up, and it seems like one of the themes is when God is silent, um, or seems to be silent. So how, even if someone is fasting from entertainment or food, what are we supposed to do when it seems like God is silent? We're creating that space and God doesn't fill it.
Right? He doesn't show up to the party. Well, I think that book Silence is well written, and the author Endo Shushaku, I think, is a real Christian, a deep Catholic man. Because, and I haven't seen the movie, Martin Scorsese's rendition of it in cinema, But it seems to me, from what I've heard of the movie, especially Father or Bishop Barron's review, that uh, the movie kind of celebrates a person giving up his faith, or at least gives the imprimatur on, approves of giving up a trampling out a crucifix. But that's actually not what the book presented. It presented finding God even in the incomprehensible silence, because there was no break in the silence in that book. God never spoke other than in the absolute silence. And so the silence itself is the presence of God. Now, how that actually is perceived, it's hard to say. But given also, so I read that book, Silence, and reading John of the Cross at the same time. And I think John of the Cross, one of the mystical doctor of the church, in his key word of nada, nothing, and then silence and emptiness, it seems like God is not present, but there's a deeper presence of God. It's just we're afraid to stay with that silence. Naturally, it's repulsive, and we seek to find some meaning, some obvious meaning when there is none. But it's not an obvious meaning when we fast and we feel completely empty and powerless, and God's not showing himself and not giving us power. But that's Christ on the cross. In order to enter into that redemption, we have to join ourselves as the mystical body of Christ, to the complete emptying. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's the goal of fasting and all penance, is to be with him on the cross, and so to enter heaven in that way.
Okay, so it sounds like it's just the being uncomfortable in general, however that is, should bring us closer to God.
Being uncomfortable with him, not just being uncomfortable, period, but being
Well,
with him on the cross.
I guess that's my question. There are so many things in life where we do become uncomfortable. How do we ensure that we are uncomfortable with him as opposed to just being uncomfortable?
Certainly
What
by
can we do?
offering, make that act of the will to offer up this emptiness, loneliness, in union with him on the cross, but also just keeping our mind and our wills open to his presence in whatever way it manifests itself in that emptiness. It won't, we will not have been able to predict the manner and the time of his visitation, of his manifestation to us, manifesting his presence. That's the definition of fasting. I think you put yourself in a position of vulnerability. You empty yourself, and you don't make any demands on how you expect him to fill you up. So it's just being powerless and throwing yourself upon his mercy. It's an act of self-surrender.